The private dining room at Bellissimo had been reserved for 3 months. Mom's 60th birthday was supposed to be perfect. 23 family members, Italian marble tables, fresh orchids at every place setting. What none of them knew was that I had reserved a table too, not in this restaurant, but at the bankruptcy court 3 blocks away, where my sister's husband's company would be filing papers in exactly 72 hours. My sister Jessica had spent 40 minutes describing the planning process to anyone who would listen. She stood at the entrance like a wedding coordinator who'd confused a birthday dinner with her own coronation, clipboard in hand, directing relatives to their assigned seats, with the precision of someone who believed organization was a personality trait. I arrived exactly on time, wearing the gray dress my mother had once called mousy, the same gray dress I'd worn to sign my 3rd patent deal, the same gray dress I'd worn when Forbes featured me in their 30 Under 40 Innovators issue, an issue that sat unopened in my parents' mail pile for 6 months before being recycled with the credit card offers. My parents barely glanced up when I entered. Dad was showing my brother-in-law, Eric, his new golf clubs. "Tailor-made," he said proudly. "Jessica and Eric got them for me. Can you believe it? Must have cost a fortune." I could believe it. I'd seen Eric's credit card statements, the ones he'd stupidly stored on a shared family cloud drive. The golf clubs were purchased with a cash advance from his 3rd credit line, the one he'd opened when the first 2 maxed out trying to keep his logistics company afloat. Mom was admiring Jessica's Honda CR-V key fob like it was a Cartier bracelet. "Fully loaded," Jessica announced for the 3rd time. "Leather seats, panoramic sunroof, the works." Eric and I decided we deserved something nice. What Eric and Jessica didn't know was that the dealership financing that Honda was about to be called. The bank had already flagged his account. I'd made sure of that, not by doing anything illegal, but simply by declining to renew a certain consulting contract that had been keeping his company's largest client happy. A consulting contract he didn't even know I held. I took my assigned seat at the far end of the table, next to my cousin's 9-year-old son, who was absorbed in his tablet. The seating chart had been strategically planned, according to Jessica. I was positioned as far from the birthday girl as physically possible while still being in the same room. "Emma, you made it," Mom said, her eyes already drifting back to Jessica. "That's nice. Is that the same dress from last year?" "The year before, actually," I said pleasantly. Jessica smirked. "Some things never change." She turned to her husband. "Remember when I offered to take Emma shopping? Tried to help her update her wardrobe? You suggested I shop at the Target where you worked," I reminded her. "Said you could get me the employee discount." "I was trying to help," Jessica said, her voice dripping with the particular sweetness she reserved for public performances. "Not everyone can afford nice things, Emma. There's no shame in that." What Jessica didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the Target she managed was about to close, part of a corporate restructuring. I'd seen the memo 3 weeks ago, courtesy of a board member who happened to be a grateful recipient of my consulting services, the same board member who was, at this very moment, sitting in a conference room deciding which regional managers would be offered transfers and which would be offered severance. Jessica wasn't on the transfer list. Uncle Tom arrived 20 minutes late, slightly out of breath, his tie askew. He was my father's younger brother, a patent attorney in Silicon Valley who visited Boston maybe twice a year. We'd stayed in touch mostly through email, discussing obscure intellectual property law questions I'd had during my work. He was also the executor of my grandmother's estate, a role the family had long forgotten about, since Grandma had passed away broke 15 years ago. At least, that's what everyone believed. Sorry, he said, kissing Mom's cheek before scanning the table. His face lit up when he spotted me. "Emma, there you are." He practically jogged to my end of the table, ignoring the empty seat beside my father that had been reserved for him. "Uncle Tom," I said, standing to hug him. "How's life after that $3.8 million patent sale?" he asked, his voice carrying in the momentary lull of conversation. "I told my partners about your moisture detection coating technology. Brilliant work. We're still talking about your presentation at the Geneva conference." The room didn't just go quiet, it went silent in that specific way that makes your ears ring. Jessica's mouth was open mid-word, the story about her Honda's Bluetooth connectivity dying on her lips. My brother-in-law's wine glass paused halfway to his mouth. My father's hand froze on his water glass. My mother's face went through a remarkable journey: confusion, recognition, panic, and finally a desperate attempt at a smile. "What patent?" she whispered, her voice somehow carrying to every corner of the room. I calmly sipped my wine, letting the moment breathe. The Chateau Margaux was excellent. I'd specifically requested it be added to the wine list when I'd called the restaurant last week. I'd also arranged for the bill to be sent to me, though I planned to let them discover that particular surprise later. Uncle Tom, perfectly aware of the bomb he'd just detonated, we'd rehearsed this over email for 2 weeks, continued with manufactured enthusiasm. "The agricultural applications alone are game-changing, and the licensing deals you structured? Emma, you're going to revolutionize crop management in drought-prone regions. 3 continents are already using your technology." The World Food Program called it the most significant innovation in sustainable agriculture this decade. "You sold a patent?" my father said slowly, each word carefully pronounced. "For $3.8 million. Last April," I said simply. "To Agritech Solutions. The deal closed on the 15th. "Last April," my mother repeated. She was gripping her napkin so tightly her knuckles had gone white. That's almost a year ago." 11 months, I confirmed. "I tried to tell you. Called on April 16th. You said you were busy with Jessica's housewarming party." Jessica found her voice. "You're lying. You work at a library." "I'm a research chemist at Dendrite Solutions," I said. "I've been there for 6 years. The library job was during my PhD program. That ended in 2019. "But you told us," Mom started. "I never told you I worked at a library," I interrupted gently. "When I mentioned my research position at Dendrite, you said, 'That's nice, dear,' and changed the subject to Jessica's promotion to assistant manager at Target. I stopped correcting the assumption after the 3rd family dinner. It seemed cruel to keep embarrassing you." Eric's face had gone the color of old yogurt. He was doing math in his head. I could see it happening. His logistics company had bid on several agricultural tech contracts in the past year. Contracts that had all mysteriously gone to competitors at the last minute. "Wait," he said slowly. "Dendrite Solutions. They're the consulting firm that reviewed our Midwest distribution proposal." "Are they?" I took another sip of wine. "The contract fell through. The client said there were concerns about our operational capacity." "That's unfortunate." Uncle Tom was looking between us now, awareness finally dawning on Eric's face like a sunrise made of horror. "The irrigation systems company," Eric continued, his voice rising, "the seed distribution network, the fertilizer logistics contract, they all went to the same competitor, a competitor that kept citing technical consultation as their edge." "Eric," Jessica said sharply, "this isn't the time—" "Your wife's company?" I asked mildly. "No, I don't think Dendrite consulted on any of those bids, but I did notice you were competing against Harmon Logistics on several of those contracts. They're good. Very technically proficient. I should know. I helped them develop their cold chain monitoring system last year. Pro bono, actually. They reminded me of myself when I was starting out. Young, hungry, systematically underestimated." The blood drained from Eric's face. You tanked our bids?" "I didn't tank anything. I simply helped a more deserving company compete at their full potential." I smiled. "It's not my fault your operational capacity actually does have significant gaps. The consultants who reviewed your proposals simply noticed things that might have been overlooked otherwise." My father set down his fork with a sharp click. "Why didn't you tell us about any of this? The patent, the consulting, "I did tell you. Repeatedly. For years." I set down my wine glass. "I sent you both an invitation to my PhD graduation. I mailed you a copy of my dissertation. I emailed you when I got the job at Dendrite. I called when my first patent was approved. You told me you were busy with Jessica's housewarming party." "A PhD?" Mom's voice had gone very small. "You have a doctorate. Materials Science and Chemical Engineering. MIT. Graduated summa cum laude." I turned to Uncle Tom. "Thank you for asking about the patent. The licensing revenue is exceeding projections. We're looking at an additional $1.2 million over the next 3 years from the secondary applications." "Wait," Dad said. "Wait, $1.2 million on top of $3.8 million? That's just from the moisture detection patent," Uncle Tom said, his voice low and precise. The executor voice, I'd come to think of it. "Emma's patent portfolio is significantly more extensive. She has 4 patents currently in application, 3 already approved and licensed, and 2 more in development. The $3.8 million sale was actually her smallest deal. My cousin Rachel, seated midway down the table, started laughing. Not polite laughter, actual gasping laughter. "I'm sorry," she managed between breaths, "but Aunt Helen, you told me last Christmas that Emma was finally holding down a steady job shelving books. You said it with a straight face. I thought—" Mom looked at Dad helplessly. "You thought wrong," Uncle Tom said, his voice colder now. "Emma's patent has been featured in 3 industry journals. She gave a keynote speech at the International Polymer Conference in Geneva last fall. She was nominated for the MacArthur Fellowship. I assumed you were bursting with pride." The waiter appeared with appetizers, creating a moment of forced normalcy as plates were distributed. No one touched their food except me. I was starving. I'd worked through lunch preparing for this evening, and the salmon tartare was exceptional. Jessica recovered first, pivoting with the smooth desperation of someone trying to regain control of a ship that was already taking on water. "Well, that's great, Emma. But money isn't everything. Eric and I are focusing on work-life balance. My promotion to senior assistant manager comes with real leadership responsibilities." "That sounds fulfilling," I said sincerely. "More fulfilling than just selling some patent and coasting," she added, her smile sharp. Uncle Tom made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. "Emma's not coasting. She's currently heading the development team for a biodegradable plastic alternative. The preliminary results are extraordinary. If it works at scale, we're looking at a potential environmental revolution." "We," Dad said. "My firm handles Emma's IP portfolio," Uncle Tom explained. "We've been working together since her 2nd year of graduate school." He paused, and I saw him check his watch. Right on cue. "Actually, speaking of family matters, there's something else I should mention while we're all together." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "As you know, I'm the executor of Grandma Rose's estate." The table went quiet again. "Grandma Rose?" Mom said. "But she died 15 years ago. There wasn't any estate. She died broke." "That's what you assumed," Uncle Tom said. "In fact, she had substantial holdings that were placed in a 15-year trust. The terms specified the distribution was to be kept confidential until the trust matured." He smiled. "It matured last month." Jessica's eyes went wide. "How much?" "The total estate value is approximately $4.2 million after appreciation." The collective gasp around the table was almost comic. I kept eating my salmon. "Grandma Rose's estate was divided according to her specific instructions," Uncle Tom continued. "She was very particular about who had visited her in those final years, who had called, who had sent birthday cards." Mom's face went pale. I knew she was doing the math. Grandma Rose had spent her last 3 years in a nursing home. Mom had visited twice. Jessica hadn't visited at all. Dad had gone once, complained about the smell, and never returned. I had visited every Sunday. "The distribution is as follows." Uncle Tom opened the folder. "To my daughter Helen, who I know tried her best, $50,000. To my grandson Robert and his wife, $50,000. To my granddaughter Jessica, who I hope will find time for what matters, $10,000. Jessica's face contorted. "10,000? That's—" "And the remainder of the estate," Uncle Tom continued, his voice cutting through her protest, "totaling $4.09 million to my beloved granddaughter Emma, who sat with me every Sunday, who read me my favorite books, who held my hand when I was afraid, and who never once made me feel like a burden. May she use this blessing to build the life she deserves." The silence that followed was absolute. I set down my fork and looked at my mother. "I didn't know about the inheritance until last month, but I want you to know, it doesn't change anything. I would have visited Grandma every Sunday regardless. She was the only one in this family who ever asked about my work, who remembered my birthday, who believed I could do anything I set my mind to." My mother started crying. Real tears, not the delicate ones she produced for sympathy at church functions. "Emma, I'm so sorry. I never meant to—" "Make me feel invisible?" I supplied gently. "I know. You didn't mean to, but you did." Eric stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. "This is insane. You deliberately sabotaged my company. You stole contracts from us. This is corporate espionage." "Is it?" I tilted my head. I don't work for any of your competitors. I'm a research chemist, remember? I simply provided technical consultation to various companies that happened to be in the same field. That's not espionage, that's consulting. I'll sue you, With what money? I asked quietly. Eric's face went slack. Your company is $3.4 million in debt, I continued. You've missed the last 2 payments on your second mortgage. The Honda was bought with a cash advance that you can't pay back, and the bank is calling your loans on Tuesday. I know because the bank happens to have consulted with Dendrite on their agricultural portfolio assessment, and your company came up as a risk factor. Eric couldn't finish the sentence. I didn't cause your problems, Eric. You did. You took on debt you couldn't afford. You expanded into markets you didn't understand. You hired your fraternity brothers instead of qualified logistics managers. And you treated your wife's sister like something you'd scrape off your shoe at family dinners because you thought she was nobody. I stood up. I am not nobody. I never was. And now everyone in this room knows it. Jessica grabbed her husband's arm. Eric, sit down. Just sit down. But Eric wasn't listening. His face had gone from white to red. You think you're so smart. You think you've won something. But this is just money. We have family. We have connections. Do you? I asked. Let's find out. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, tapping open a folder of screenshots I'd prepared. Jessica, did you know that your husband has been having an affair with his office manager for the past 18 months? Her name is Brittany. She just turned 26. He bought her a car last year, a BMW. That's where the second credit line went. Jessica's face went utterly still. I found out by accident, I continued. Cloud storage is fascinating. People forget what devices are synced. Your husband's phone backed up to the family photo stream. Some of those photos were illuminating. Eric made a strangled sound. I wasn't going to mention it, I said. It's not really my business. But since Eric wanted to talk about family values and connections, I thought the family should have all the relevant information. Jessica turned to look at her husband. Is this true? Jess, I can explain. Is it true? Eric didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was confirmation enough. My mother put her face in her hands. This can't be happening. This isn't how this was supposed to go. It's my birthday. You're right, Mom. I picked up my purse. It is your birthday. And I haven't given you your present yet. I pulled out an envelope and set it in front of her. She opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a check for $100,000 and a letter. The check is for you, I said. Use it however you want. Renovate the kitchen. Take a trip. Pay off the mortgage. It's yours. No strings attached. Mom stared at the check like it was written in a foreign language. The letter is from the admissions office at Boston College, I continued. They're accepting applications for an adult continuing education program. I remembered you once said you wished you'd gone to college. You were 18 when you got pregnant with Jessica, and you never had the chance. I don't understand. I'm not doing this to punish you, Mom. I'm doing this because I love you, despite everything. Because I spent 31 years trying to earn something that should have been given freely, and I'm done trying. You can have my love, you can have my forgiveness, but you can't have my approval anymore, because I finally realized I don't need yours. I turned to my father. Dad, I'm having a clean water system installed at your fishing cabin next month, the one in Vermont. I know the well water has been making you sick, and I know you've been too proud to fix it because Jessica told you it wasn't worth the investment. It's worth the investment. You're worth the investment. Someone should have told you that years ago. My father's eyes were wet. Emma, and Uncle Tom will be sending you the details about Grandma's estate. There are some personal items she left you specifically. Her photo albums, her wedding ring, some letters she wrote during the war. She wanted you to have them. I think she knew you'd appreciate them more than anyone. I looked around the table one last time. At my mother, crying into her napkin. At my father, stunned into silence. At Jessica, staring at her husband with the betrayed fury of a woman whose entire life had just collapsed. At Eric, who looked like he might vomit. At the cousins and aunts and uncles who were all trying very hard to be invisible. I'm leaving now, I said, but I wanted you all to know I'm not angry. I was, for a long time, but anger is exhausting, and I've built too good a life to waste it on resentment. I walked toward the door. then paused. "Oh, one more thing. The dinner tonight is on me. I arranged it with the restaurant last week. Consider it my birthday present, Mom. I hope you enjoy the dessert. I had them prepare your favorite, tiramisu, the recipe you used to make when I was little before things got complicated." I left without looking back. The fallout happened faster than I expected. Eric's company filed for bankruptcy 3 days later. The affair became public when Brittany sold her story to a local gossip blog. Apparently, she was angry about being promised a position that never materialized. Jessica filed for divorce within a week, but the real destruction was quieter and more complete. I got a call from my father the day after the dinner. He didn't apologize, at least not in words, but he asked me to explain what I did for a living. Really explain it. He listened for 47 minutes without interrupting, asked questions that showed he was actually processing the information, and then said very quietly, "I wish I'd been paying attention all along." It was a start. My mother called 3 days later. She'd enrolled in the continuing education program. "I want to understand the things you talk about," she said. "I know I can't catch up to you, but I want to try. I want to be able to have conversations with my daughter. Real conversations." "That's all I ever wanted, Mom." She started crying again. I know that now." Jessica didn't contact me for 2 months. When she finally did, it was a text message. "I'm sorry I was threatened by your success. I'm working on it," I responded. "I'm sorry I let you think we were in competition. We were never in competition. There was nothing to win." She started therapy. I heard through Uncle Tom that she was finally addressing the insecurity that had driven her to constantly put me down, the fear that had started when we were children, when our mother's attention was always split, when Jessica had learned that the only way to feel safe was to make sure someone else was lower on the ladder. I didn't forgive her immediately. Forgiveness isn't a light switch, it's a process, but I left the door open. 6 months after the dinner, I received an invitation to speak at the Global Sustainability Summit in Stockholm. The speaking fee was $75,000. I accepted. Then I forwarded the invitation to my parents with a note. "If you're interested in attending, I'd like to buy your tickets." They both came. They sat in the front row of my keynote speech, watching as I presented our biodegradable plastic research to a room of 500 scientists, policymakers, and industry leaders. The presentation ran 37 minutes. My mother took notes in a small leather journal I'd never seen before. My father cried during the standing ovation. Afterward, in the hotel lobby, he pulled me aside. "I missed so much of your life," he said. "Yes," I agreed. "You did. Can I be there for the rest of it?" I thought about the years of being overlooked, the dismissals, the casual cruelty of being forgotten in the same room I occupied. I thought about the check my mother still hadn't cashed. She'd framed it instead, hanging it next to my MIT diploma with a plaque reading, "Given with more grace than we deserved." I thought about the choice between holding on to pain and allowing space for change. "Yes," I said finally, "you can be there for the rest of it." A year after the birthday dinner, I sold another patent. This one was bigger, $11.2 million for a water purification system that could operate on solar power alone. The technology was being deployed in 7 countries by Christmas. I was featured on the cover of Scientific American. The headline read, "The Quiet Revolutionary: How Emma Richardson is Changing the World One Patent at a Time." My mother bought 17 copies. My father framed the article and hung it in his office, the home office he'd finally set up after retiring, where he spent his days learning about materials science from online courses and calling me with questions that showed he was actually trying to understand. Jessica started working at a nonprofit that helped women re-enter the workforce after divorce. She was good at it, actually, better than she'd ever been at retail management. Turns out, she had a talent for helping people rebuild themselves. She just hadn't known it because she'd spent her whole life trying to rebuild her own self-worth by tearing down mine. We had lunch every other week now. Real lunches, not the competitive dinners of our youth. We talked about our lives, our struggles, our hopes. We talked about Mom and Dad and the years of dysfunction we'd both survived. We talked about therapy and growth and the long, slow work of becoming better people. "I still don't understand how you stayed so calm," she said one afternoon over sushi. "At the dinner, with everything you revealed, you never once raised your voice. What would have been the point?" I asked. "Yelling doesn't change facts. Anger doesn't make you right. I'd already done the work. The truth spoke for itself. But you must have been so angry for so many years. I was, but anger is a fire that burns the person holding it. I decided a long time ago that I'd rather build something than burn myself down trying to get revenge. Is that why you helped me? After everything I did to you? I set down my chopsticks. I didn't help you because you deserved it. I helped you because I wanted to prove to myself that I was better than the person this family tried to make me, that I could be successful and kind, powerful and generous, that I didn't have to become cruel just because cruelty was what I knew. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. I don't know how to thank you. You already have. You're here. You're trying. That's enough. The summer after the Stockholm conference, I threw a party, not a family gathering, a real party, at my new house in Cambridge. The one I'd bought with the biodegradable plastic money. 3 stories, a wraparound porch, a garden big enough for my research greenhouse. I invited colleagues, friends, former students, anyone who had ever believed in me. I also invited my family. They came, all of them. Even my grandmother's ghost seemed to hover over the proceedings, her presence felt in the vintage photos I'd displayed on the mantel, the recipe cards from her kitchen that I'd used to cater the party, the stories people told about a woman who'd seen my potential when no one else would look. My mother gave a toast. She stood in my living room, surrounded by MIT professors and industry executives and the people who'd shaped my career, and she said, I spent 30 years not seeing my daughter. I told myself stories about who she was, stories that made me feel better about my own choices. I missed graduations and promotions and breakthroughs. I missed the woman she was becoming because I was too busy watching the woman I wanted her to be. She paused, wiping her eyes. But Emma gave me something I didn't deserve. She gave me a second chance. She invited us back into her life, even after we'd done everything to push her out of ours. And I am standing in this beautiful home, surrounded by all of you who loved her when we didn't, and I am so grateful that my daughter is exactly who she is, not despite us, but in spite of us. The room applauded. I felt my father's hand on my shoulder, steady and warm. I'm proud of you, he said quietly, not for the patents or the money or the house, for showing us who you really are. I leaned into his embrace. I was always this person, Dad. You just weren't looking. I know, he said. I'm looking now. The revenge, if you could call it that, wasn't in the revelations at my mother's birthday dinner. It wasn't in Eric's bankruptcy or Jessica's divorce or the systematic dismantling of the lies my family had built about me. The revenge was in living well. It was in building a life so full of meaning and purpose that their indifference became irrelevant. It was in creating something beautiful from the neglect they'd offered me. It was in proving every single day that I was exactly as extraordinary as I'd always known myself to be, even when no one else could see it. And in the end, the real victory was grace. I could have destroyed them completely. I had the resources. I had the information. I had years of accumulated grievances that would have justified any cruelty I chose to inflict. Instead, I chose to build them a ladder out of the hole they dug, not because they deserved it, because I did. I deserve to be the kind of person who responds to cruelty with compassion, who answers neglect with abundance, who refuses to let the worst impulses of others define her own choices. I deserve to be free. And freedom, I learned, isn't about making others pay for what they did to you. It's about refusing to let their mistakes become your prison. 2 years after that birthday dinner, my mother threw me a party of her own. It was smaller than mine, just family, plus a few of my colleagues she'd gotten to know. She'd spent 3 months learning about my research so she could have real conversations with the scientists I'd invited. She'd taken cooking classes so she could prepare my favorite meal herself. And in the middle of the party, she stood up and gave me a present. It was a scrapbook, page after page of every article ever written about me, every conference program that listed my name, every photograph from every event I'd ever asked her to attend. She'd tracked them all down, some from my colleagues, some from industry publications, some from corners of the internet I didn't even know existed. I can't get back the years I missed, she said, but I can prove that I'm paying attention now. I held the scrapbook in my hands, running my fingers over the photos of myself at lecterns and in laboratories and accepting awards from dignitaries I barely remembered. Thank you, Mom. I love you, Emma. I always did. I didn't know how to show it. And I let Jessica's need for attention become an excuse for ignoring yours. That was wrong. That was so wrong. And I'm sorry. I hugged her. For the first time in my adult memory, it didn't feel like obligation. It felt like family. I love you too, Mom. She pulled back, tears streaming down her face. How did you become this person? After everything we put you through, how did you become so kind? I thought about the question, about the years of invisibility, about the grandmother who saw me, about the uncle who believed in me, about the work that saved me, the research that gave me purpose when my family gave me none. I made a choice, I said finally. A long time ago, I decided that the person they thought I was didn't get to be real, only the person I knew I was. And that person, she was always kind, she was always strong, she was always extraordinary. She just needed the world to catch up. My mother smiled through her tears. The world caught up. Yes, I said, it did. And so did you. The private dining room at Bellissimo still hosts birthday parties. They added a plaque near the entrance last year, something about historical significance, about a dinner that changed everything, though I suspect they were mostly interested in the publicity. I go back sometimes, not for nostalgia, but for perspective. I sit at the table where I once felt invisible, and I remember the person I used to be. The woman in the gray dress, the doctorate-holding scientist who let herself be dismissed as a library worker, the inventor who sent patents into the world while her family wondered why she couldn't find a real job. That woman is gone now. In her place is someone who learned that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's transcendence. Someone who discovered that you don't have to tear others down to build yourself up. Someone who found that forgiveness isn't a gift to the person who hurt you. It's permission to stop carrying their weight. I don't know what my grandmother would think of what I've become. I like to believe she'd be proud. I like to believe she's watching somehow from wherever grandmothers go when they leave us. But I know this. She would have told me to keep going, to keep building, to keep being extraordinary, even when, especially when, no one was looking. And that's exactly what I've done. The patents keep coming. The research keeps progressing. The biodegradable plastic project just received FDA approval for medical applications. They're calling it the biggest breakthrough in sustainable materials since Bakelite. But the real work, the work that matters most, happens in quieter moments. In Sunday dinners with parents who actually listen, in lunches with a sister who's learned to celebrate rather than compete, in phone calls with a father who asks about my research because he genuinely wants to understand. The real work is building a family that finally sees me, not because I forced them to look, because I became impossible to ignore. I'm writing this from my office at MIT, where I was recently offered a tenured professorship. Through the window, I can see the campus where I once felt like an imposter, where I wondered if anyone would ever recognize what I had to offer. That feels like another lifetime now. My mother calls every week. My father sends me articles he thinks might be relevant to my research. Jessica invites me to her non-profit galas, where she introduces me as my sister, the genius, with genuine pride instead of bitter irony. They're not perfect, neither am I. But we're trying. And sometimes, trying is enough. The gray dress still hangs in my closet. I keep it as a reminder, not of who I was, but of who I refused to become. A reminder that being underestimated is a gift, if you know how to use it. A reminder that the quietest person in the room might be the most powerful, because power isn't about making noise, it's about knowing when to be silent, and knowing exactly what to say when you finally decide to speak. My mother's 62nd birthday is next month. I'm hosting it at my house this time. I've hired the same caterer from Bellissimo. Turns out the chef remembered the dinner, remembered watching my family's faces as their assumptions crumbled. That was the best dinner theater I've ever witnessed, she told me when I called to book her. What are you planning for the sequel? I laughed. No sequel. Just a celebration. My mother's starting her second year at Boston College. She made the dean's list last semester. Can you believe it? 61 years old and she's finally chasing her dreams. That's beautiful. It is. And this time I want to celebrate her. Really celebrate her. Not for what she did wrong, but for what she's doing right. There was a pause on the other end of the line. You know, the chef said finally, most people in your position would have walked away, would have let them stew in what they'd done. Why didn't you? I thought about the question. Because walking away would have meant letting them define me, would have meant the Emma they imagined, the unsuccessful, invisible, forgettable one, would have been the last Emma they knew. I didn't want that to be my story. What did you want your story to be? I smiled. I wanted it to be about transformation, about the power of patience, about building something so undeniable that the people who dismissed you have no choice but to see it, and then, once they finally see it, about giving them the chance to be better, even if they don't deserve it, especially then, because that's when it means the most. The story could end there, I suppose, with the reconciliation, with the healing, with the family that finally learned to see me, and the woman who learned to let them try. But life isn't a story. It doesn't have neat endings. So here's what happened next. Last month, I received a letter from Eric, the first contact he'd made since the dinner, 2 years ago. He apologized, not for the affair, which he seemed to think was between him and Jessica, but for the way he'd treated me, for the years of condescension, for the library worker jokes, for making me feel small at every family gathering. He's in recovery now, apparently, working at a trucking company, doing dispatch, making amends as part of the program. I wrote back. I told him I accepted his apology. I told him I hoped he found peace. I didn't tell him that I'd quietly arranged for his new employer to receive a recommendation from one of my industry contacts, that the dispatch job, which seemed like a lucky break, was actually a second chance I'd orchestrated from behind the scenes. Some kindnesses work better in secret. Jessica knows, of course. She figured it out almost immediately. "You're behind this, aren't you?" she asked over lunch the day after Eric got the job. "Behind what?" "Eric's new position. The reference. The whole thing." I shrugged. "I have no idea what you're talking about." She stared at me for a long moment. Then she laughed. "You're unbelievable. He was terrible to you. He destroyed our marriage. And you're still helping him?" "I'm not helping him. I'm removing him as an excuse. Now Jessica has no reason to feel guilty about moving on. Now Eric has a path forward that doesn't involve self-pity. Now everyone can heal. But why? Why do you care if he heals?" I set down my chopsticks. "Because his healing is part of yours, and your healing is part of mine. We're all connected, Jess, even the people who hurt us. Maybe especially them. We can pretend we're separate, pretend that destroying them doesn't damage us, but it's not true. Every wound we inflict comes back. Every grudge we carry weighs us down." Jessica was quiet for a long time. "You really believe that?" "I live that. Every day." She reached across the table and took my hand. "I don't know how I ended up with you for a sister, but I'm grateful, even though I spent most of my life being too jealous to see it." I squeezed her hand. "That's what family is, Jess. Showing up, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Mom's 62nd birthday party was a success. 37 people, including professors from my department and friends from her continuing education program. She showed everyone her grades, all A's, with the pride of a teenager showing off college acceptance letters. Dad gave a toast. He talked about watching his wife chase her dreams at 61, about watching his daughter build an empire of innovation, about the years he'd wasted being blind to both. "I spent my whole life thinking I knew what success looked like," he said. "Turns out I was wrong. Success isn't about achievements. It's about growth. It's about becoming the person you were supposed to be, even when life makes it hard. And my wife and my daughter, they're the most successful people I know." Mom cried, I cried, Jessica cried. Even Eric, who'd been invited at my insistence, wiped his eyes. Later, after the guests had gone, I found my mother in the kitchen, looking at the scrapbook she'd made me. "I keep adding to it," she said. "Every time I see your name in print, every time someone mentions your research, I want to remember. I don't want to miss anything else." I stood beside her looking at the pages. "You know what I love about this scrapbook?" "What?" "It's not just about me. Look," I pointed to a section in the back. "You added your own accomplishments. Your Dean's List certificate, your essay that was published in the college newsletter, your photograph with your study group." Mom smiled, tears in her eyes. "You said something once, that you wanted to prove you could be successful and kind, powerful and generous, that you didn't have to become cruel just because cruelty was what you knew." "I remember. You proved it, Emma. Every day you prove it." She closed the scrapbook. "And you taught me something I should have known all along, that it's never too late. that we can always become better, that the person we were doesn't have to be the person we are. I hugged her. That's all I ever wanted, Mom. For you to believe that. For all of us to believe it. She held me tight. I believe it now. I finally believe it. The private dining room at Bellissimo is hosting another birthday dinner next week. Not for my mother this time. For Uncle Tom, who's turning 70. The seating chart is different now. I'm at the head of the table, between my parents. Jessica is beside me, her new girlfriend on her other side. The cousins have rearranged themselves based on actual friendship rather than obligation, and at the far end, in the seat where I once sat alone, there's an empty chair. Not because anyone's been excluded, because Grandma Rose is there, in spirit. Her photo sits on the chair, her presence felt in every conversation about legacy and love, and the long, slow work of becoming who we're meant to be. She would have loved this, I think, seeing her family finally become what she always believed we could be. And somewhere, I know, she's watching, smiling, proud, not of the patents or the money or the professional success, proud of the grace, proud of the choice to be kind when cruelty would have been justified, proud of the woman her granddaughter became, not despite the challenges but because of how she chose to face them. The revenge was never about destruction. It was always about this, about sitting in a room full of people who finally see you, about being loved not for what you achieved, but for who you chose to become, about proving that the best response to invisibility isn't noise. It's becoming undeniable. It's becoming free.